if you were coming to the Wendish Museum this morning, I would say to you, Vatachi Nam. That says, welcome in Wendish. But since I'm the one that has been welcomed here, Vatachi Nam isn't appropriate, and I can't say hello in Wendish. So you're kind of stuck with me today. If Joyce would be the one presenting, she would have on a traditional festive costume. I have on part of a work costume. The festive costume is really elaborate. Each village had their own, but not many of those costumes have survived. In fact, they weren't brought to America because they were festive, they were hard to make, they were hard to keep clean, and they honored a certain time of the year. So, how many of you have heard about Wendish people? Good beginning. How many of you think you are Wendish? Aha, even better. Have you been to the museum? Okay, come. Let me tell you about the Wendish people. We are not a German tribe, although our existence has been in Germany. We are a Slavic tribe that in ancient history of 300, 400 AD were part of the tribes that moved down in what we know as Germany and Poland and that area. Historians have divided those tribes into about 12 identifiable groups, of which the Wendish are the smallest. Oh, I'm not doing this right? I should try it now with my voice?
Yeah, testing.
Testing? Can you hear better?
Yeah. A little bit more. She's going to turn it up just a little bit more. It's working now.
Okay. And so I'm just thinking as she did this, I should have told you who I really am. Oh, there. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I was an educator in California for 40 years and a school administrator. I was used to getting my voice over about 1,000 kids at a time. I didn't know I wasn't on, what do you call this, microphone until she fixed me. Okay, I don't think I need to start over. These 12 tribes, or these 12 groups of tribes, the Wendish were the smallest. And there is a historian by the name of Gerald Stone, who's from England. He said that we were the smallest Slavonic nation in the world. And his book is very technical about that time period. And you can say that of the Wendish people, almost anything you say about them is true. Okay? At some time in their history, it was true. They were a minority. We are a minority. We've never had a nation. We didn't see a need for a nation. As they migrated south, the Germanic tribes moved out. So they didn't need a nation in those days. And then the Germanic tribes moved back in, and they were truly a minority. So anything that you say of groups of minority people, it's true. At times, the Wendish people were not allowed to buy property. If they had a craft, they couldn't advertise with a sign by the door. They were paid cheaper prices. Just like I say, anything that's true of a minority was true of the Wendish people. But let's jump ahead to, they were the last tribes to become Christian. In the 1200s, there was very much pagan worship. And some of the folk tales of the Wendish people have pagan roots in them. I'll tell you about two of them in just when I talk about the folklore of the Wendish people. Lost my place for a minute. So they were pagans, and about 1200 was when they start being Christianized, and they were some of the last to be Christianized. They became Christian, and then when the Reformation happened, they worshipped as Catholics before then, and with Luther's influence, then a lot of them became Lutheran because Luther operated in the same area where they lived, south of Berlin, north and east of Dresden, along what is called the Spree River. In fact, that area is called the Spree Wall because the river spreads out into all these little canals that are beautiful today. It's where the rich people from Berlin, the rich Germans, had their summer homes there. And if you go there today, the little canals, they have little boats. They're about as long as this table. And they're called a con. And that's how they went through the canals. They propelled it with a pole. So if you go today, you will find usually a woman in her festive dress, which has a lot of lace and great big headgear. And they, for a price, you can ride in the con and have wine and cheeses and meats, and they will take you through these canals. There are 2 villages that you can't even get to except by riding on the con. The other thing is they grow a lot of cucumbers there. And every little house, not every house, but they have little docks. And so there's a price tag telling you how much the pile of cucumbers are. And you go a little bit further, and you can tell a fed-up farm woman, hers has a sign for free. Take them away, I don't want them anymore. It's a very beautiful part of Germany. But also in that area, not far over, then you move over, and that was Luther's land, Wittenberg and along in there, Leipzig even. The Wendish people spread out all throughout that area. So many of the Wendish people became Lutheran at that time. And in a way, I am thankful that some of them did not become Lutheran. Because what happened is that the people, I'll get further into the story and tell you what happened, but the people who stayed in the Catholic Church and worshiped in the Catholic Church, they maintained the Wendish traditions better than the Lutherans did because they had no influence on. One of the most beautiful of the traditions exists from, I'd say, easily 500 years ago. And that is, in the Christian faith, you have Christmas, but you really have the meaning of Easter. So on Easter morning, what the men from the congregation would do is they would dress themselves up in beautiful tuxedos and flowers, and they would dress up their horses. And they would ride around their church. Usually, they'd have a church service, and they'd ride around usually 3 times, singing Glory, Hallelujah. And then they would ride to the next village and do the same thing, ride around the church 3 times to bring the news, the good news of the risen Lord. And so they would go to a number of villages, and then about noontime they'd get hungry, be fed, and they'd go to a different variety of villages going home. This tradition has been maintained by the Wendish Catholics of Germany, where it has almost died out with the Protestant group. It's a very expensive tradition because you have to rent a horse, you have to wear a tuxedo, you have to decorate everything, but it is glorious. We were there on Easter morning, one real foggy Easter morning. We got ourselves to the right church at Radabar, and we were waiting in the cemetery. In that particular cemetery, they treat all the graves the same. They're all covered with pansies, and they had some kind of succulent growing on the side, and they have white crosses, with what's written about the individual on a plaque about this big, they reuse their graves. So after about 50 or 60 years, somebody else gets buried there. But a whole cemetery of matching graves is just glorious. And that particular morning, just as the riders were coming over the hill, the sun came out, the pansies woke up, and I was standing there speaking German, not knowing I knew German. So it was beautiful. Those kinds of traditions have been maintained by the Catholics in Germany, where, like I say, the Protestant groups have lost those. So Lutheranism was the dominant religion, though, of the Wendish people in the 1800s. So then what happened in the 1800s that started changing things? In Germany at that time, almost anything you said of Germany again was bad. The political picture was as bad as what we have in America today, and I won't go into that. There were droughts, horrible droughts that would last for 2 or 3 years, and then would come the floods. And so just living in the 1800s in Germany was difficult. But the big thing that happened that was different was that King Ferdinand of Prussia and his wife, Queen Louise, sure hope I got that right. Ferdinand was a Calvinist, and Louise was Lutheran, which meant they couldn't go to communion together. So his solution was to make one evangelical Lutheran, or a Protestant church, not a Lutheran church, an evangelical Protestant church. And it would be a state church. Bring all these people together and he could have communion with his wife. That was a good solution, but not with the Wendish people. Because many of the Wendish people said, nope, we want to stick closer to Luther's teachings. And especially, well, they even referred to themselves as the old Lutherans, no matter how old they were. They saw themselves as pure in their doctrine than what the state church would provide for them. So with all the other reasons to immigrate, and also transportation had changed. There were now trains. Ships were crossing to America, to Australia, to South Africa. All of these things played into the discussion of it's time to leave Germany and immigrate. So the group that came to Texas, there were other groups. Couple of groups went to Australia, like late 1830s, 1840s, but the difference with the groups going to Australia is that they went in smaller family groups. And if you think of a reunion and how many people you get at a reunion, that's about how many people traveled together to Australia. When they got there, they spread out and started forming in different places. This caused the breakdown of the Wendish groups that were there. They couldn't worship together as much. They had longer distance to go. So with that, the Texas group was different because the people that really felt the strongest, and I'm sure you have them in your congregations too, there's somebody that just feels really strong about the way things should happen in a church. Those are the people that said the strongest, we should immigrate. We should find us a place to have our own colony where we can have pure Lutheran Wendish worship. So different people from about 60 different villages came together, and they were really brought together more by the laymen, the individual people of the congregation, and they decided that they should immigrate to Texas. There were almost 600 of them, I think 588 to be exact. They were the true leaders of the people who came to Texas. The pastor that they called before they left Germany, his name was Jan Killian. That's in Wendish, it would be Jan Killian. In German, it would be Johann Killian. And in English, it would be John Killian. And so he used all three names. He did learn English after he came to America. Just checking to make sure I don't forget something. So they came together and they called Jan Killian as their pastor, and they immigrated here as a complete congregation. So what's unique about the Texas Winds over the Winds that went to Australia, a large group went to Canada, to South Africa, to Iowa, and I've just heard that there was even a family that went to South Carolina, is that this was the largest group that left Germany at one time to arrive in one place here. So what happened to them? They all gathered in Hamburg. They had to ride a train from Dresden, which was a new adventure, but they didn't all come from exactly Dresden. So they arrived in Hamburg without their pastor, without Jan Killian. He had been accused of inciting immigration. So he had to go to court before he got on the ship. And of course, he passed. But he was also a very forgetful man. So as he began to travel with his wife and only surviving child of 4 that they had in Germany, he left his passport and a package and had to go back. That was in Belgium. He had to go back and get it. When he went back, his wife, not speaking the appropriate language, also got lost, and eventually they came together in Hamburg. There was one other problem. The group of Winds that had come to Texas in 1839 had shipwrecked off of Cuba, and they lost, there weren't any people lost, but they lost all their possessions. And so when they got to Hamburg, these Winds were assigned to do different ships. And they said, no, we're only going in one ship. We're not going to have that same problem. So, or if we have the problem, it will be a bigger problem. So, so they waited around to get on one ship. The problem is that cholera was very prevalent in that city at that time. And so many of them contacted cholera. And as they got onto the ship, they started dying. So they had to stop in Ireland to get the ship fumigated. It was during that passage time that my husband's family lost their big daddy, Michael Dube. And Michael Dube died, and we don't know where he died. If he died in Hamburg, some people say, oh no, he was buried in Ireland, they got all the way to Ireland. Others say, no, he was buried over the side of the ship, like most of the others who had died. But he died. 9 of his 11 children were on board, and his very strong wife says, we're going on to America. And so they got on the Ben Nevis, is the name of the ship that they came on. Like I say, 588. They were each allowed to bring one box called a Lade, which is a German word for a shipping crate. If they had a craft, they were allowed another box with their tools in it. The pastor was allowed a small organ and another, like chest of drawers that he had books in, but they were allowed very little. All the family belongings had to go into that shipping crate. And I know, because I've done the acquisitions at the museum, I am sure that every single family brought with them a Wendish Bible and Wendish hymnals. I know that because when their families couldn't read those books, they gave them to the museum, and we have them all. I have with me two of these are new Wendish hymnals. You can pass them around and see that the language is not like German. We are not a Germanic tribe, we are a Slavic tribe. And so our language is most like Polish, Czech. In fact, people who show up there at the museum, sometimes they can read the Wendish language because they're familiar with their own language. But we've been told that we have the largest collection of Wendish books outside of Germany. And we have two very, very rare books that you probably won't see when you come, but except if you would ask for them. Young Killian was a theologian. He was a hymn writer, and he had in his collection of books what he said were 12 volumes of Luther's works printed in the 1500s. So we applied our English to it, and we thought that volumes meant volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. That's not true. He really meant he had 5 books that have been translated and written by Luther. These books are beautiful. They're huge, they're leather bound, and we don't normally have them on exhibit. Another book would be like these small hymnals. The first books that were written in the Wendish language were hymnals. And if you remember, Luther really had a thing for the vernacular. He wanted the people to have the German language in their hands, especially German Bibles. So the first books that got written in the Wendish language were hymn books. The first one was written, I want to say late 1500s. But in 1937, when the communists were taking over that part of Germany, they confiscated all of the religious books that they could find. So the books, the hymnals that were printed in 1937 were confiscated and burned. But we have one copy. I took a picture of the fly page. I took it back to Germany one time to ask a Wendish pastor there, what's the book that I'm holding? What is this? And he said it's that I probably was holding the only existing hymnal from 1937 because the rest of them were all burned. And the one that we have is a very good, it looks as good as these. These are very new. You can tell the difference between the Catholic and the Lutheran. Go to the hymn writers in the back, because the Catholic hymnal doesn't have any hymns written by Martin Luther. And they don't have any hymns written by Jan Killian. So if you check the back of in the index where it shows you who wrote what, you can tell the difference. I want to say that the skinny one is the Protestant and the fat one is the Catholic, but I may not have that correct. Okay. What else should I tell you about them coming? Oh, when they got on the ship, they lost a lot of people overboard, and there's stories of many, many people being buried at sea from cholera. So they came on, they left in October of 1854, and they arrived in Galveston in December of 1854. And they went from Galveston area up to the Houston area where there was a Lutheran pastor. Baum was his last name. In Houston, there was yellow fever. So while they recovered from their voyage and tried to, reorientate themselves to going on, they were exposed to yellow fever. So again, many of them died there. And the Dube family lost their youngest daughter at that time. She was the first Wendish person to die on American soil. If you come to our museum and you go to the church, which is the oldest Missouri Synod Lutheran church in Texas, there is a large plaque made of, sandstone. And it has the names of all the people who died in transit to America, as well as their ages. So when they were on the ship, they saw themselves as old Lutherans, and they wanted to stick very close to the Lutheran doctrines. But they had already been exposed to Pietism, which is a little bit looser than Old English, in that it dwells much more on your personal relationship with God and also your relationship with your neighbors. So they were known for having evening worship services. They were known for having not a strict liturgy for the church service. So that was their first argument. And apparently it started already on the ship. How are we going to worship? So there was a group that said, okay, we've had enough. We're going to start another church right over here. So the first church was called St. Paul. The second church was called St. Peter. And in the middle was the cemetery, because dead people don't argue anymore. And the children from the school, because there were two different schools also, that's big in Lutheran policy and thing, they called the other group Auslanders, you foreigners. Yeah, you outside. Well, that argument died out within a couple of years. So they were back together. But in 1870, now remember they had arrived there they had arrived in Serban in 1855. But in 1870, they had another argument about which language should we use in our worship. Many of them still knew Wendish. And the Wendish people were very bilingual. They had to be, because they were German citizens. And the Wendish was used at home and in school. But then the adults had to use German to be able to operate within the community. So they were very bilingual. But it caused them a problem as to how we should worship. So they split again. And St. Peter became a very active church. And it stayed an active church until 1914. When everybody was giving up Wendish and a fair amount of German. So they came back together. But that time, the St. Paul congregation said, if you come back, you have to each apologize for leaving in the first place. And you have to take apart your wood frame building so they wouldn't have a place to worship if they got into another argument. So they took apart the church, but I know, well, then when they put all the kids back together, the school wasn't big enough. So they had to add on to the school or build really a new school. And I know those good Wendish men looked at that pile of lumber that was already cut and ready to be used. And I believe that that lumber from that church is now in part of our museum. Because if you come to the museum, we have 3 parts to it. And the one side is the big, older part of the school. That's where I believe the wood is. And the newer part, the other part, was an add-on, and that's where we make our famous Wendish noodles, and it's where we have our meetings. And in the middle part is the interpretive part. And so if you come, you can't figure out which board is which, but I believe that's where it is. and I'm probably skipping important things I should be telling you. They continued until really the First World War, was when the Wendish people of Germany asked for their own homeland, and they were denied. And then in the Second World War, they asked again, and they weren't even answered on it. So we've never had our own nation, but we very definitely have our own culture. We have our own language, even though I can't speak it. That was another problem. When they came to America, they could talk to their neighbors, they could talk to their families, but the people that they had to interact with were Germans. And so very quickly, the Wendish language has died out. Even the customs, we don't practice the Easter riders. We don't practice. There's some families that remember the Easter morning water, when the virgins in the family would go get water on Easter morning and come back and sprinkle it on their family members to wake them up. There are some families that will talk about that. The thing that probably has stayed the most is the food. That if you go to Germany today, you're fed wild boar with a horseradish gravy. You are not fed Wendish noodles. You're fed potatoes. A lot of beer. Yeah, a lot of beer. So, my Wendish story comes out of our cookbook. When my ancestors, they were on the Ben Nevis too. They didn't have 9 children. My great-great-grandparents walked from Houston to what they thought they were going to Serban, but they got as far as the Waldeck area, Round Top area, and they stopped there. They were a young couple carrying 6-month-old twins. And so the food that got passed along was that my mother could remember her grandmother made a potato salad out of sweet potatoes. And sweet potatoes, onions, and bacon grease. And so when my mother then retired from the Houston area back up to very close to Serban, I'd say 15 miles, wouldn't you say, to her family property, she went over to the Wendish Museum and she got one of these cookbooks. Okay, if you have one, this is a rare book. Today we have the last, now it's 4, right? We're down to 4 of these. This is our original cookbook. We have 4 copies left. We're printing a new one, but I don't have it here today. So my mother bought this cookbook, and she was paging through it, and she found the recipe for making Wendish potato salad out of sweet potatoes. That caused her to keep going back over there and asking questions about the Wendish people. The next book she came across is a book called The Winds of Texas. It's a really good book. It was written in 1950s. The problem is it wasn't researched. The women didn't have the privilege of researching in 1950 that then George Nilsson had when he wrote his book, In Search of a Home. And we have these also out there. If you really want to know more about Wendish people, this is the best book to go to. But in the back is his appendix of all the people that were on the ship. And one of them was Johann Sommer. And my mother knew that that was her great-grandfather. So then she started tracking it down. Well, the truth about Johann Sommer is that he never got to Serban. He quit walking with these 6-month-old twins. He was also a mason. And he said that the rocks in Serban weren't the right kind of rocks that he used in the Round Top area. So he stayed in the Round Top area to continue having a job with building with more the, what do you call them? Limestone. The limestone square that they could chisel into a square, where the Serban area used the sandstone, and they did what was called free building, where they didn't have to shape the rocks. In Search of a Home, like I say, is probably the best book for Wendish history, period. George Nielsen is still alive. He was in Texas 2 weeks ago. He's 84, 85 years old. He's writing his next book about really the Civil War era in this time period, but not just about Wendish. Another good book is this one, Shores of Hope, which I didn't bring any copies, but this is at the museum. Shores of Hope was written by Trudia Malinkova, who is a Wendish, she's part of the Sorbian Institute in Germany. She wrote this book first in Wendish and quickly wrote it in German, and then the society had it translated into English, and we have it available in the bookstore. The uniqueness of this book is she looked at where people left Germany and where they went to in the world, which is different than George Nielsen's book. She deals much more with the people who went to Australia and the people who went to Iowa. And I think, have I told you all the parts? No. There's no way I could remember everything I could possibly tell you. Like I say, if Joyce would be here, she would wear the beautiful festive costume, and I'm wearing the work costume. And this fabric is called Blaudwerk, which is a German word. This factory, or this technique, has existed from the 1400s. This factory has existed in Pulsnitz, Germany, from the 1600s. And it was owned by the same family from the 1700s until about 10 years ago, when the man couldn't find anybody in his family who would take on the business, and he sold it outside of the family. But this is batik. And so it's printed with wooden blocks that have brass nails, and they dip it in wax and then apply it to linen cloth, and then they dye it with indigo dye. My daughter has on another apron, and then the tablecloth out there is also. I have probably one of the largest collections in the US, but you can tell, those of you who are close, there's a little white dot up here, and then there's another little white dot right there. That's one block from there to there. So the white dots help them place. The next one is there. Next one is there. These are bigger blocks, but they're only that size. And then this would have been the whole piece. We can't get this fabric anymore. The new owner likes to mass produce, and she's not using the old traditional Wendish patterns. So we don't know how to get any more of it. So take care of it, Anna. Okay. Another thing that kind of overlaps is the Wendish area was part of Germany, over into Poland, down into Czechoslovakia. In fact, in Prague was one of the largest of the Wendish seminaries. It's still in existence, but it's just not as prominent as it used to be. But there is, Sicily is the area, and it has white clay there. So they make pottery from that area that is, it's very white. And if you go to a place like Tuesday morning, sometimes you can buy what's called Polish pottery. It's made, it looks very similar to this. It's made with this white clay. What's different is that this is a Wendish pattern. And the most color you'll ever find is like what I have in this coffee cup. And there are very few Wendish potters still alive. I think there's 3 that I know of. But it looks similar to Polish pottery, and it's often called Polish pottery, but you look at the design and say, nope, that's Wendish. So Bautzen is the main city there. Bautzen is known for its mustard. It's been growing mustard for, I don't know, centuries. In German, it's Zimpf. There's even a restaurant, the Zimpf restaurant, where everything is flavored with mustard. But you can go there and you can get a mustard container or a salt and pepper container that either has salt and pepper written in German or in Wendish, either way. So this is another book I should pass around. It was printed in Germany, but the pictures, the reason we buy it is because it shows a lot of the older generation and how they dressed. Their work costume would have been this apron over probably a flowery skirt and a short black jacket. What did the men wear? They were very practical. Good pair of boots, black pants, white shirt, suspenders. And that was very much their dress. This is another book I brought along. When we go there, we like to buy things that are Sorbian or Wendish. Oh, I should talk about that too. This is a children's dictionary in German and Wendish. In Germany, in fact in all of Europe, we are referred to as Sorbs and Sorbian. And in America, well, in the English language, then we say Wendish. They're interchangeable. But Wendish at one time was kind of a derogatory term in Germany, and I don't know why. But we call ourselves Wendish, and we're comfortable with it. So let me talk about the noodles. When they came to Texas, they had to learn different things to grow. They were used to rye and wheat, and that didn't grow as well as the corn. They were also used to more pigs than cattle. And they learned to deal with lots of chicken, because in the summertime they could eat a chicken all at one time, and they didn't have to refrigerate it. But then what are you going to do with all those eggs? So that's where the tradition of the Wendish noodles started. And our noodles are made with farm fresh eggs. And if you cook them with a good chicken broth, they're very, very good. They're easy to cook. But the real measure is my husband's aunt, who was 100. She died about 2 years ago, right after her 100th birthday. She says, well, if you don't think they're good enough, just add a stick of butter. And she was known. Aunt Erna was known for her. In fact, this pin came from Aunt Erna's 100th birthday. We had quite a party, and her favorite color was purple. She has a little brother who's still alive, my husband's only uncle. He was 100 in November, and we had a big party for him. The rest of us, will we make it? I don't know. We're known for being a stubborn person. My husband says I come up to my Wendish roots very well like that. We're also very dependent on ourselves. We're very giving to other people. Our religion is important to us. And we eat very well. When we celebrate, when the society started almost 50 years ago, there were 5 very determined Wendish women who wanted to go to the Folklife Festival in San Antonio, and they were told, you need to have a couple of things. You need to represent a society. You need to have officers. You need to have a costume, and you have to have something to sell, handmade, at the Folklife Festival. So they came home and they said, okay, there's 5 of us. You're the president, the vice president, secretary, treasurer. And they formed the society. They had pictures of relatives in Germany that were black and white. And so they said, we can make that. We just need an apron, white blouse, shawl, and a little bonnet, which is also another unique thing. The Protestant people wear white bonnets, and the Catholics wear a big black bow on their bonnet that hangs way down. So just walking down the street, you can tell if a woman worships as Lutheran or Protestant, or if she worships as Catholic. Okay, so we said, let's honor, it was 10 years ago, well, actually 7 years ago, we said, let's honor these 5 determined women who started our society here in Serban at Wendish Fest, which is our big festival in September, and there's some flyers that are out on the table. They're from last year's Wendish Fest, which happens in September, but it does give you a picture of what goes on that day. So we said, let's honor those 5 women by wearing bonnets. So everybody was bringing their bonnets out. The men wore straw hats. The women brought theirs out, and we started collecting patterns, and we now sell about 3 different versions of the bonnet. This is a work bonnet, and it's based on my husband's his memory of his grandmother's bonnet. It needed to have, this is a work bonnet, that needed to have a large collar on it. That's going to interfere with the, so that you wouldn't get sunburn on your neck. And then it also needed to have a good brim that would keep the sun out of your eyes. So they put grooves and they put cardboard in so that you can pull the cardboard out, wash it, starch it, and put it back together. They even had bonnets, the women who went to Serban church, they wore black bonnets to church. And theirs had great big brims. I put one on and I thought, boy, you can't look out the side at all. The women who then went to the Fedor congregation, they wore white bonnets. And the ones who went to the Water congregation, I have never found out what color they wore. But those were the first 2 churches that were spin-offs of that original St. Paul. If you come to the museum, there's a brochure on St. Paul, so out at the table. If you come to services at St. Paul, even though it's out in the country, services start at 8:30. If you want to sit down inside the church, you need to be there soon after 8 o'clock. The church is packed, and they have an overflow area in their gym. They still maintain a parochial school there. There's one in Serban, and then there's one in Giddings. And those are 2 of the very few Lutheran schools that still exist. If you're a member of St. Paul and your children go to school there, they go tuition free. And those children do very well when they have to transition then to the high school there. I'm trying to think, what else should I tell you about? Wendish Fest, that happens in September. We get 1,800, 2,000 people to come. This year we do not have anybody coming from Germany, but we often have groups that will either band groups or sometimes dancing groups, always a musician group of some sort. I told you I was going to tell you about their folklore. Another thing about their culture, we have the Eastern European technique of dyeing Easter eggs, batik with wax. We also practice that. I can't pronounce the Wendish word for it. We have a woman who usually comes from Germany and brings her eggs. If she doesn't come, she at least sends us about 200, 300 eggs every year to sell, and I have a few of those. But let me tell you about 2 of my favorite characters from Wendish folklore. One of them is the Wassermann, German name. This little character, they're told, and this comes from pagan times, the stories and the folklore. The Wassermann lives underneath the water. And the story that's told to the children is that if you get too close to the edge of the water, any water, the Wasserman will come up, grab you, and take you down to play for the rest of your life with his children. And so this is told to children to keep them from playing close to the edge of the water. The other favorite character is the Mittelfrau. And she is always, well, I used to have long gray hair. Her hair and my hair look very much alike. She's always pictured as a woman who's hunched over with stringy hair. And she walks through the middle of the day dressed in white, which is the color of death, and she carries a sickle. Because if she finds you working in the heat of the day, she is going to strike you down dead. So what does it tell the men? Take a nap. You know, don't work in the middle of the day. Now, I have probably skipped 1,001 things that you really want to know about. So do you have questions?